Jo, thank you so much for joining me in conversation today. I am very excited to be having this chat with you. I'd love to start by asking you what you sense or imagine is going on in the global human psyche right now.
Oh, well, I love the way you start with a very small question. What's going on with the human psyche? Well, I think we're at a crossroads in human evolution and development, and there seems to be this choice, which is we either go into a whole new way of seeing and understanding ourselves, our relationships, and the interconnection and interbeing of everything, or we follow the route of sort of fear and grabbing and individualization and separation and polarization, and actually sort of go into a terminal decline. So I think we're coming to the stage where actually there is a very clear choice to be made. And we know sometimes in our lives that happens to us when we have a fundamental illness, or we're given some really bad news. We're given a choice, aren't we, of am I going to fundamentally shift the way I act in the world and the way I look after myself, or knowing that if I carry on as I am, then that will be the end of me. So I always like to think of things, what we see in the collective as always also being something that's in the personal. And there's not really a difference. There's a difference of scale, but actually not a difference in terms of of our understanding that what is in the one is in the all, what is in the all is in the one. And if we believe that, then we can see it.
I love that connection between, the Thich Nhat Hanh into being concept, which is so poetic, and also just fundamentally real, our dependence on one another. And then the scale question. So I wonder, when thinking about all of the crises that we face, I'm curious about how we conceive of ourselves, because a lot of folks, to sort of speak to your point about the path of fear or the path perhaps of love, a lot of us worry about humanity just being this, it's kind of, I don't like using the words because it just doesn't feel like it's generative, but, a cancer upon the earth, or this plague. There's a lot of language around that sort of really heavy, nasty stuff that we're afraid of, we don't want to talk about, we don't want to be it. And it's quite an unhelpful story to have about ourselves. No one wants to think that they're fundamentally problematic or bad. And so I wonder, what are some of the most unhelpful stories that you feel we hold about ourselves as a species? And what are some of the more beautiful stories that we forget about ourselves?
Well, I think what we forget about ourselves is that we are part of life, and that whatever we see in the world is related to our own consciousness, and so there's no separation between things. And I was coaching someone yesterday, and she had written a poem while she was away about seeing. She was in Scotland and seeing a stag, and then seeing a sea eagle, and seeing porpoises, and where we came to was actually, there is no difference between her and the porpoises, and each of us is in each of us, in everyone else. And so this idea of actually, when we look out into the world, we're seeing with our eyes and our consciousness. And so whether we choose to see something beautiful or something ugly, something fearful, something with huge generosity and care, is really the way we choose to see the world. So in other words, we have enormous choices, and that's a beautiful, if you want to talk about beauty, I mean, how beautiful that we have the consciousness and the ability to make decisions about what we pay our attention to, what we see, how we relate. And that, I love in Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, that the view we have leads to our perceptions, and our perceptions lead to our thoughts, and our thoughts lead to our actions. And that is the world we create. And I think, there's enormous beauty in seeing this amazing capacity we have And then, in a sense, the worst story is when we choose to see things as only outside of ourselves and things that seem to be separate from us and have no connection to us, and that we can then blame, and then we can sort of portray as evil or as negative or as damaging, and without being able to own it, so that we project all our negativity on the world and then attack it. So I think the beauty and ugliness is in that sense just a choice. In terms of what you see as, this negative thing of people seeing themselves as a plague, and if we just wipe ourselves out quickly, then the earth will be fine, is a sort of misrepresentation of what I think the truth is. I think we have the capacity, as I say, to destroy or to create. And when we're destroying, it's coming from pain and suffering. It's not because we're evil, it's because we don't know how to handle our emotions. We don't know how to deal with the circumstances we're in. And then we sort of, and then we can cause harm and negativity. But that doesn't make us a plague. It just shows the collective consciousness of the level of pain there is in the world, that we would choose to act in the way we do, rather than see that there's another way. And when we look at climate and sustainability, and that many of the, we've known for many years what a lot of the answers are. We have the, as people say, we have the technology. We know the route to. We have a very clear route to bringing or starting to bring things back into balance, and yet we're choosing to ignore it and to go in the opposite direction. So, that doesn't make us bad people. It just makes us not very wise.
Yeah.
And I have a friend who talks about, we've grown, our intelligence has grown, but not our wisdom. And so, our intelligence is like going up off the curve. The amount of knowledge and scientific understanding we have is huge, but has our wisdom grown even an iota? And there's that separation of wisdom and knowledge that is allowing us to create the problems we're in.
It's interesting hearing you talk about pain and suffering. I was listening to an interview that you had on, I'm going to forget the name of the podcast now, but I'll include it in the show notes. But talking about suffering and talking about grief. And for some reason, in the last week, there've been, how sometimes these things come up in clusters, these conversations or themes pop up in clusters. And one of them has been around death and loss. And I was thinking how, at least in Western cultures, we don't make space for these things. And I think there's something really fundamental about grief and love being deeply connected. And if you're not able to feel grief at what's being lost, how can you tune into the love that will move you to perhaps embrace life from a different place that enables you to live differently, to see differently? Because obviously it's not just about action. If it's just about action, it's part of the same kind of mindset that causes a lot of the problems. It's just like, let's fix it. It's like, well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. But there is something about grief and love that is really important. And I wonder what you've learnt or experienced in making space for people to tap into the unwelcome feelings, the pain, the suffering, the grief, and what happens when you give people that kind of terrain, that you let them reconnect with that.
Well, of course, when we grieve, we go into our tenderness and our vulnerability, and it's a bit like we allow the armor to fall away, and we allow our soft inner tenderness to show up, and so much of life we go out of our home with our armor on in the morning, and we feel the need to protect ourselves, and yet when we're able to touch the sort of deep well of sadness and pain in the world, what it brings out is this amazing wish to actually be present to life and to appreciate all that there still is. And I had that experience this week. It was my eldest brother's 69th birthday, and the four of us brothers left, and we were on a call together, and he was 69, and then, you know, each of my brothers is 2 years younger than I'm the youngest, and it was such a sweet conversation about the lives we've spent together and apart, and the love there is, and the support and appreciation there is between this band of brothers. Oh. And then I came off the call and I just went into this deep sadness, recognizing that, you know, one day there won't be the four of us on the call, and there'll be three of us, and then there'll be two of us. And one of my brothers said, well, you know, who's going to be at everyone else's grave? Who's going to last out? and that sense of when we lose things, it just makes us appreciate so much. I'll give you another example. Outside of my back door, there's a buddleia plant, and the buddleia plant is beloved of butterflies. Butterflies flock to it.
Yeah.
But where it is in our garden, it blocks our view to some extent. And so, you know, most of the flowers had gone, and there were just a few. So I thought, right, okay, I'm going to get out my clippers and I'm going to cut it down, and before it gets cold and while we can still sit outside, I'm going to chop it down so I can see the view better. Yeah. And then I realized actually there were still a few flowers, and those few flowers were probably more precious to the butterflies because they were still there. And actually, so I decided not to cut it down. And every morning I've been sitting outside, and there are 4 or 5 small blossoms left, you know, 4 small, and I'm watching the butterflies come and eat from that. And for me, it's like, I feel such abundance in the little that's left. Oh. And the appreciation that the butterflies can still feel from that, much more so than when it was full of blossom. When it was full of blossom, it was very beautiful, but I almost ignored it. I did not notice it, but I didn't pay attention to it. But when it was just the last blossoms, every morning I paid attention to each one, and I'd watch the butterflies come and land and feed. And I texted one of my brothers because I said, this feels more abundant. This isn't this that we think of abundance having lots of. But actually, I got this different sense of abundance, that there was an abundance in the scarcity, in the loss, in the fact that it was losing. There was still there was a deeper abundance there, because at that moment it was feeding the butterflies, and I was aware of it and caring about it. And so for me, that had a different quality of relationship than when it was full.
That's so interesting. I've been thinking recently about how to walk in both worlds, between that kind of rich space of presence and connection and sense of love, or it's kind of like a loving present state, which is magical when it happens and quite overpowering sometimes. And then and where those things happen. So for me, I'm an avid artist and a musician, and that happens most often in those spaces. Also in conversation, I find I'm a lot more alive and present on so many more levels. But then there's also kind of the corporate space, the professional space, which taps into different elements like intellectual stimulation, a certain level of belonging or relatedness. But walking in these two worlds where there's this sense of kind of where I want to spend more time, and then where I spend more time because, you know, it's kind of making a living, and other people would probably relate to this too. I wonder how possible it is to connect those two worlds together, to help people plug themselves back in to a sense of vitality and abundance and awe and preciousness and the finitude of what we actually are gifted. I think that's the thing. It's how, because we kind of, I was listening to this, thinking of this, listening to an episode on you this morning in preparation for our call, and thinking it's so easy to just rush our way through our days and distract ourselves with social media and all the rest of it in the emails. And actually time is ticking down, and it's not to put a spin of scarcity on it so that we end up in that urgent mode of panic, which obviously can happen, but more a sense of like, pay attention. What are the things that you're really going to wish you'd spent more time with or on or in relationship with when it's your last breath, because that day comes. Which might sound a bit morbid, but we don't really have anything like a memento mori in this day and age. We're kind of distracting ourselves out of death and out of life somehow. I don't know what your thoughts are around that.
Well, I very much connect to the Buddhist sort of gatha of the 5 remembrances, which the monks and nuns here in Plum Village go through every day. I am of the nature to get old. I will get old. I am of the nature to get sick. I will get sick. I am of the nature to die. I will die. I will be separated from everything I have loved and held dear. There's no escape. And all I can rely on are my thoughts and actions, because that is my continuation. And I love that, because it's saying actually all these things are inevitable, and all the things we care about will pass. But actually what continues is our thoughts, the way we have spoken to people, the way we thought about things, the way we've acted in the world, that fundamentally shift people's life. So, I think the mistake is when you describe it as 2 worlds. There's the world of your artistic endeavor, and then there's the world of the corporate. And of course they aren't 2 worlds. They're one world, but as soon as we create that division, that idea of 2 worlds, we immediately judge one as, well, I have to be a certain person in this, and therefore I will compensate for it, that in my music and my art, that then I can fully flourish, and I'll just cope with the corporate stuff. And that often leads to that belief. So that creates the collective consciousness that in business you can't have fun, you can't show up fully. I mean, I remember I used to work at when it was the HuffPost, it was part of a much larger media company, and they did this sort of internal campaign saying, "Show up fully to work." And I thought, my God, that's the last thing they want, because if everyone showed up fully to work, then the business would fundamentally change. So no one turns up at work fully themselves because they believe that it's not possible to do that, and they would be fired or whatever. And of course there are things we can and can't do. But when I was at work, I always tried to be fully myself, and found that when I was more fully myself, more things happened, and that it was only this convention that I had to stick within, this very narrow confines, that kept things as they were. So, the truth is that in every interaction we're in life, we can be an artist and a painter.
I love that.
Every time we talk to someone. Well, I remember when I was at The Guardian, I was trained up as a coach because I wanted to sort of support the journalists. While continuing to be a journalist, I wanted to support journalists who were suffering, because there was, like everywhere else, there was a lot of suffering. And so they trained me up, and then the opportunity didn't work out. And I went to see the head of learning and development. And she said, "Don't worry about it." She said, "Every conversation is a coaching conversation. You don't have to be a formal coach to coach. Every time you interact with anyone can be a coaching conversation." And so if if we were to change our mind about work and just show up more, then what often that does, and I know there are risks, it depends on our levels of power and our feelings of security and all that, but if we show up 10% more, and everybody showed up 10% more, and had a different quality to the conversations and to the decision making, and a broader understanding of the impacts you have and then how you might want to behave, then things would over time fundamentally shift. And there's this thing saying that if you take a huge ship and you change its direction by 5 degrees, then it will end up in a very different part of the world, because over time that 5 degrees becomes a big distance. So it's not something about we have to fundamentally change everything now, but it's saying as we start to change things and start to really sort of see with fresh eyes, then the world starts to shift, and then we give people other permission, because so much in life is the permission we give people. That by showing up in a particular way, it gives people permission to also show up that. And just one last thing, in all the sort of group work I've done, either facilitated or taken part in, what shifts the dynamic is always the one first person who shows up with their true emotions. It might be they cry or they share a vulnerable moment. And after that moment, everyone's sharing changes. But if no one does that, the sharing will stay within a very tight sort of constraint.
Mm-hmm. It reminds me of a similar observation by Mac McCartney, who runs Embercombe, and talking about work with leaders and sustainability, and kind of knocking away on a sort of 3-day, I think it was about a 3-day session, trying to get people to care more deeply. And in the end, he changes tactic and dares the people in the room to try something different. And they say, yeah, sure, we can dare to try something different. And then he asks them one by one, what do you most profoundly love? And what you described just there is like the first person cracks open, and then the whole, it's like a domino effect, the whole room shifts into a completely different space. So I'm curious to ask, you mentioned permission, and one of the things that I think is really quite striking about what seems to happen with people who are connected with Plum Village over time, and I'm thinking here of the outrage and optimism folks who I know that you're connected with, and in particular, Cristiana Figueres. My partner is from Costa Rica, so he's kind of very invested in their work in the world, and how she has been quite open about the teachings that she's found valuable through this Zen Buddhist practice, and the spiritual values that have enabled her and countless others who are not perhaps as visible to be able to engage in work that is perhaps frightening or complicated, or that don't seem to have a clear path forward. And I wonder what your thoughts are around that, about orienting oneself perhaps more publicly towards values when we're in such a kind of materialist age.
Well, I was just on a call with Christiana earlier, and one of the things that she and I have been doing is working with the monastics to create these climate retreats for climate leaders and activists. And there's one coming up in a couple of weeks, and we've done, and the plan is to take them around the world. And what my experience, having done 3 now, is just the fundamental shift in people's consciousness when they stop, rest and heal and open themselves up. And so at the most recent retreat, there's so many examples of people realizing that they've just had blinkers on and they've been missing out on what's most important. So there was one man who, and one of the things we do in the retreat every day is a meditation walk, and it's a very slow walk to go nowhere. and one of the senior leaders in the afternoon, they're sharing family sharing circles, and in the sharing circle I was in, he said, "I'm always in a hurry to get somewhere. Wherever I walk, I'm in a hurry. I never walk slowly, and I certainly would never walk for no purpose, just to go nowhere." And he said, "But this has been the most profound experience." Mm. And there were a couple of people who said, "I thought I was just a busy person. I'm always busy. And I thought that's who I am. Mm. That's what I love. That's how I operate." And after being here for 2 days, I realized I don't want to be a busy person. And actually these 2 days where I've just been resting and slowing down and focusing on my breath and focusing on my body, that actually this is my happiness. And everyone who comes to these retreats fundamentally shifts, because they realize that they've been caught in a story that no longer serves them. And I've had long conversations with Christiana, and she's a real blessing. I refer to her as I've told her, I said you're like an oak tree, because by being prepared to speak out now more deeply and honestly about her spiritual path, rather than hiding it to some extent, she offers this extraordinary refuge for other people to do the same, because the fear, of course, is that the current system doesn't give permission for these feelings or this way of seeing. And so most people avoid it because they think there's a punishment, that they'll be punished for it. And they feel powerless to, so, there's the idea of I leave myself at home when I go to work. And what people like Christiana is doing is someone who's deeply respected, deeply honored. No one can call her woo-woo, or that she's a crazy, or that she's lost the plot, or that, I thought she was something, but actually I realized she was never anything at all, and it was just all a pretense. She's one of those people that says, wow, if Christiana is in for that, then I'll sign up and have a look. And what we get with the retreats is, if I sent out the invitation to all these leaders, maybe one might show vague interest. And if Plum Village sent it out to all these leaders, there'd be a handful of people who would say, well, I'll, not used to this, but I'll give it a go. When Christiana sends out the email, everyone just says yes.
Yeah.
Because they trust her. And they say, I don't know what it is, I don't understand, it doesn't make any sense to me, but I'll come. So if you look at that, that's why it's so important to have permission, because it casts shade under which we can all rest and say, well, if Christiana can be like that, then I can show up a bit more like that.
So I have a question then. If we're thinking about ways in which shifts happen, and obviously kind of the inner work and the outer work mirroring one another, what are your thoughts around how we can bring that quality of presence and connection that we experience in these contexts where, you're bringing people into a space which is an intentional space, which has been crafted to help people feel again, perhaps more fully, their belonging in a wider web of life. And when so many of our lives on a day-to-day basis have ended up in such a way that they are atomizing, or, kind of our time is parceled into hours and minutes, and it's about productivity and meetings. And how do we carry with us those seeds of change within ourselves into those lives when the old structures are still there? How do we interact with that so that those seeds can kind of take root and something else becomes possible?
Well, I love the film The Matrix, and The Matrix is all about seeing through something as not really being the reality you thought it is. So and I remember once when I was at the working as a business and finance journalist at the Daily Telegraph. This was many, many years ago. And we were in the Canary Wharf offices, and in the Docklands of London. I remember walking to the office through this big underground shopping centre, and I was just watching, and I realised it had already passed. It looked like it existed, but it already didn't exist. That one day this wouldn't have no meaning, and it wasn't really the reality. I saw that it wasn't really a reality. It was almost a chimera. It's almost like in a desert seeing an oasis that doesn't exist. And so, for all the reasons that are very good reasons, this reality and this system we're in and we've created looks like it's solid as a rock. It looks as though it's immovable. And also we know it is a collection of thoughts, and it's completely permeable. And if enough people change their mind about it tomorrow, it would cease to exist because it was no longer real. So the Buddha said that, with our thoughts we create the world, and we do. So one of the things is that we can be fully in something and recognize that it's not real. And one of the things in Thich Nhat Hanh's teachings, but also Buddhism in general, that is quite difficult to get hold of, but I think is fundamentally helpful, is this concept of two dimensions. There's the ultimate dimension and there's the historical dimension. And the historical dimension is we're living in this moment. The planet, our planetary ecosystems and our social systems are degrading and in danger of collapse. And I want to do everything I can to change. And that I want to make my, this is my life that I'm going to devote to this. And then there's another truth, which is actually, everything, the nature of everything is impermanence. We have no idea what will happen or what won't happen. That there have been, in the eons of life, of time, that things are constantly rising and falling. Civilizations rise, civilizations fall. One day the earth will explode because the sun will explode. So that's not for 4 billion years, but the earth, we know the earth already has a lifespan, and it too will pass. And that we know that and I know nothing about science or anything else, but there's this idea, isn't it, that we are made of stardust. That was other stars exploding that brought all the debris to Earth and created life. And it may be that in 4 billion years the Earth will explode and all the life there is left will be thrown into space and may end up populating life on other planets, and that we have no idea, and that nothing is, you can't create energy, you can't kill energy. Energy shifts, it's constantly shifting. And so we don't have to be in control of knowing, and we're not in control of deciding what will happen. And those are both true. I used the example the other day with someone who I was coaching. I said, when Rome was, if you were alive when Rome was burning, and the infidels or whatever you call them, I don't know what that's an appropriate term or not, but the heathens or whatever were about to ransack the city,
yes, yeah.
And you were in the city and you were sort of doing quite nicely, thank you. You would think that your world had ended, that it was the end of civilization. That actually it was the end of anything meaningful. And now it's a sort of footnote in history, which some people in the West may study for, a short while as they're studying everything else. And so it may be that this is in hundreds, thousands of years that, this will be a short note that's studied as there was this moment where it looked like people thought the world was ending, that nothing would come of it, that we've all sunk. And we don't know. And also there is this moment where there is danger and we do want to act in the same way that in Rome, if you saw the city being ransacked, you don't say, oh, well, there's the ultimate dimension. It doesn't really matter what happens. You get the sorry, I won't swear, but you get the hell out of there
You
as
can.
quickly as
It's
possible.
marked explicit. Just for yes.
Okay, all right. You get the fuck out of there and you run for the hills as quickly as you can.
Yeah,
you know,
you would.
and as that sort of Sufi phrase, trust in God, but don't forget to tie up your camel. Which is because if you don't tie up your camel, it's going to head off. So, and I feel that we're in that place, is that tying up our camel is trying to save what is going on now, but also trusting God, which is trust in the ultimate way of things and of life. And most people see those as in deep conflict with each other, and they aren't. And I'm not very advanced in my understanding of this, but again, coming back to Thich Nhat Hanh, he talked about it as the Z of Zorro, which is that the top line is the ultimate, the bottom line is the historical dimension, and he draws the interlining line to make it a Z, and saying that these are not separate; they interpenetrate each other. So that if you're working in the historical dimension, which is all the problems we face in the world now, but with the understanding of the ultimate dimension, it brings out a sense of peace and acceptance and understanding. It takes away the panic and the need to be right, and the sense that if I fail, then it's all on my shoulders, and then it's up to me. And if we don't do it in 5 years, then we fucked up, and it creates all this burnout and pressure and feeling. And you can be at peace and work really hard and be fully committed and give your all, but there's a complete difference in the energy of that. Whereas if you're panicking and you think this is all there is this moment, and if the world goes to hell in a handbasket, that's the end, and there's nothing left that has any meaning in the world, then you're going to panic, and we know that when you panic, it doesn't really help. So these deeper ways of seeing actually help us to be more effective, because Thich Nhat Hanh gives the example of a boat, which is in danger of sinking, and if everyone's panicking, the boat sinks. And sometimes it takes one calm person in the boat who gives a sense of peace and calmness that quietens everyone down. And that is about presence.
Mm-hmm. I wonder how, obviously, well, I'm not a Buddhist practitioner. I have tried various things in the past. Like I'm quite fidgety. I like to move. So my presence tool of choice or practice of choice would be movement, like 5 rhythms or something like this, or walking in the forest, which I love, or Hampstead Heath when I'm in London, because I live in Barcelona. But there is definitely something about the quality of presence that we bring to others, and then people just, there's something interesting about when you intentionally do that. Like I've mentioned this a few times on the podcast, I hold these gatherings at my art studio where I share my painting space with my partner, and on every full moon, or occasionally if we're traveling, it'll be on a new moon, just because it's easy to keep track, we'll open the doors and people will come, friends, folks who are connected with our friends, and we'll just be together for an evening, and there'll be whatever people want to drink and eat, and songs, and it's just very unpretentious, sitting on the floor, but there's this moment where the shoulders drop, and whatever tightness we've been carrying is allowed to just dissolve a little bit, and time suddenly becomes a lot fuller, in the sense that we're not scrambling to go to the next thing, or I don't know, there's something about that for me it feels like a radical act is to create refuge for oneself and others. You mentioned the tree with the shade underneath, that these spaces, these moments that punctuate, in my case, sort of a monthly rhythm, are profoundly nourishing. And so I wonder if people are listening to this or watching this and they don't necessarily have an established practice, what are some of the starting places you might suggest for them to find that kind of spaciousness for themselves, to cultivate or drop into a sense of presence?
So just to be clear, I think probably the worst practitioner in Plum Village. So I've subcontracted all my practice to my wife. So she sits every morning. She does Tai Chi every morning. She does morning pages and writes about what's going on in her mind every morning. And I get up, have a cup of tea, and sort of think, oh shit, what should I do with my day? So just to be clear, I'm not a good practitioner in the traditional sense of things, but I think I'm a not bad practitioner in the art of mindful living. So I think the mistake is to think that practice is a formal thing. Now, of course, I would probably be a much better practitioner, have a much clearer mind if I did sit every morning, but I'm not a sitter either. I like to move about. I like to get up and about and do stuff. And I think people find their practice climbing mountains, playing music, dancing, swimming. There's all sorts of ways we can come to our center and let the sort of swirling busyness and fears and concerns sort of, as you say, melt away. So I think the first thing is not to judge oneself as I'm not good at this, therefore I'm never going to be good at that. And I think cultivating presence is cultivating self-awareness. It's saying, actually, why do we trust people? Because we know they hold something. And we know that we can trust something in them. And what is it we trust? We trust that actually there's an awareness of who they are, and that they can then express it in a way that reaches and touches people. And so I think, cultivating presence is, coming back home to oneself. And it's not something you read about. It's not something you learn about. It's something you sort of start to experience. And there's certain, it took me, when I was a young man, I really didn't think I had anything to offer. I didn't really think I had any worth at all. And it took me a few years to get to a place where I could say I liked myself. And then a bit longer, another 2 or 3 years before I could genuinely say that I had love for myself. I couldn't say I loved myself, but I had love for myself, that I could appreciate that I had something to offer. Because it was like, for most of my early years, I was like a bowl that was empty. And I felt I had nothing to give myself, then how could I have something to give other people? And when my bowl started to flow over, because it was actually filling up, then I was able to start being generous with other people. So so many people avoid looking at themselves because they think it's self-indulgent. And actually, who am I? And people have so many self-criticisms about I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy enough, whatever I do is not going to be enough. And we have so many childhood wounds that force us into sacrifice and denial and all sorts of jealousy, rage, whatever it is. And for me, Plum Village and my practice being the journey home, that, recognizing that I was no longer going to, these were no longer going to rule my life. And coming to live in Plum Village was a decision, and it was about creating spaciousness. So I realized that actually, if I wanted to offer spaciousness to other people, then I had to offer it to myself. And that if I'm in my coaching facilitation practice, if I'm busy, then, and people come to me with all their busyness, all I'm offering them is my busyness. It doesn't matter what I say. I'm offering my busyness.
Yeah.
And so actually we offer who we are, not what we say. So if I would say I have an aim, it's to cultivate my presence in the sense that what I recognize, and I love the metaphor, the tuning forks, that what we become aware of, or what we can change, is what we can respond to, is resonance. In the same way that you strike a tuning fork and another tuning fork, the same. In the same tone, or whatever you call it, I don't know the right word, where frequency will also then vibrate. And so in a sense, we're all that. If I'm angry, resentful, bitter, twisted, which I'm sure I am in part, But if that's my predominant narrative, then that's actually that's what I offer to other people. And I will bring that resonance out in them, which we all have.
Yeah.
And if I'm sort of more generous, kind, thoughtful, caring, affectionate, playful, joyful, then to the extent I'm able to do that will be the extent that I offer that to anyone around me who can then touch it without knowing they're touching it, because they're just resonating to it. In the same way that if you're kind to someone who's in a bad mood, you can change their mood because it's bringing up another aspect of them that is blocked at that moment. So if you were to imagine, and I don't, if you were to imagine that we're all just frequencies, like that sense, we're creating frequencies, and then we have our individual frequencies, and then we have the collective frequency, and those have an impact on us. So when the collective frequency is around sort of closing down, polarization, othering, then that touches that part of ourselves as well. And we can, however kind we think we are, it touches our place of fear or othering as well, because we all have that. In the Buddhist psychology, there's the sort of stored consciousness in which all the seeds of our emotions are in there, and our life depends on which ones get watered. And so if we're constantly being watered by greed and by the idea of greed and wanting things just for ourselves and not caring about others, that's what gets watered in our individual seeds as well, because everything goes to support that, the advertising, who's successful, who's seen to be famous, all the rest of it.
So thinking then about how we can perhaps create a bit more space to recognize when that's happening and to make it possible to choose differently. I'm also thinking, especially now for folks who have been raised, I was talking about this with someone earlier today, like those of us who had the fortune, I think of it as good fortune, to be raised without the internet. So I remember having my first mobile when I was 16, and it was literally just one of these, clicky little Nokias that lasted for a week without having to recharge it. For those of us lucky enough to kind of be around before the internet and then also see its rise and its adoption, my feeling is that we have kind of these senses, memories, somatic senses, mental models of what it is to be able to be unrushed or to feel kind of with a foot slightly off the acceleration. And I worry about younger folks who've this is what they've known. They've been born into this hyper accelerated, technologically mediated world where everything is instant and there's so much information that it's impossible to digest or to withstand. What are ways in which we can help younger folks sort of with that? There's got to be certain things that we can do, or ways to help create spaces where they can also realize that there's another way possible. There are multiple other ways possible.
Well, and of course, it's not to generalize, because I know some young people who are far more advanced in their understanding of life than I am. And who are my teachers as well. I think one of the things is, and I'm sort of entering what, if I could generously describe as maybe my elderhood. Mm-hmm. So there's one thing which is around holding that knowledge and sharing it. Mm-hmm. So it's sort of, that's just a direct thing of, this is what life can look like. And also, when I was young, I went through different problems, and I had to find my answers to them. And as I speak, and I don't know if I believe what I'm about to say, even though it's forming in my mind. So I already know what I'm going to say, but I don't know what I'm going to say yet. But I'm already denying it. So that's interesting.
Very meta.
Is that maybe in this age, people have to go through that pain barrier. That to come into relationship the dislocation and the separation needs to be so strong and painful that it shifts us into a different way of being. That if everything was okay now, and everyone was feeling, well, the world's going to hell in a handbasket, but I'm feeling quite connected and quite happy. Myself, that may not be, but it may be the resonance of this age is showing up in people in the wish to hide away in all these choices, so much choice that there's no choice, so much information that there's no wisdom. That maybe, with AI threatening to take hold, that just maybe, if you look at the wide arc of history and time, then maybe we need to go through this period of discombobulation and separation and non-understanding, if to break through into the new ground. And that if it wasn't bad enough, then we, of course, wouldn't do it. And we all have those experiences, don't we? That something comes knocking on our door and we ignore it, and then we ignore it, and then it comes someone comes and knocks the door down and hits us over the head, and we say, all right, okay, got it. I'll do something about this. So it just may be that, because this is the human, our attempt to make sense of things. That how do we stop something from happening? And yes, of course, this comes back to the historical and ultimate. Of course, we should try and stop it, because we don't want to see people right now in pain and suffering. We want to do our best to help people feel connected and in relationship. And of course, we should be. And also, we don't know what's going on. And maybe something has to get to the point where people wake up. And Thich Nhat Hanh calls about that collective awakening. That we have to wake up, not one person, but we have to wake up as a society to say, actually, oh my God, look where we've got to. And to then say, well, it's time, we need to change this, and then to look at what's changed, what needs to change. And one thing been in the business sustainability field for decades as a journalist, and in the work I was doing, and I always said that we were preparing the ground for when a change that was ripening, and using the sort of metaphor of a farmer, that everything people have done, we've been clearing the rocks away from the field, we've been making sure that the soil can hold life, we've been sort of getting it ready, we've been so getting the seeds, and that when the rains come, something can grow, because all the work was done for it to grow. And so sometimes I see everything we've done in sustainability looks like it doesn't add up to a row of beans on one level, and on another level we've been, over the last 30 years, been cultivating the ground, that if a change were to happen, that it could happen very quickly, because everything's in place. And all we're waiting for is people to wake up in their consciousness and their action. Their way of seeing the world needs to change, and then it could change like it would. And then it's just a question of what is that point.
Yes. Yeah. There was a conversation that stopped me in my tracks a few months ago. I was walking through, so I live in Barcelona, in this neighborhood called Gracia, which is really nice, and it's not very, very green, but there are trees, and there's lots of families, and people stay out in the squares till late. You'll have grandmothers and 1-year-olds frolicking around, including the grandmothers actually, at 1 a.m. on a fiesta night. So it's a very vibrant, alive place. And as I was walking through the square, I was listening to a conversation. It was on outrage and optimism, actually, with Joanna Macy. So, beloved ecology pioneer. And she said something which is really moving to me, which was something around the idea that we, to your point about not knowing, we don't know if our generation and the generations to come are going to be, and I'm paraphrasing here, the death doulas to a collapsing civilization and planet, or the midwives to something new. And to your point about that pain barrier, the threshold, birth, and I'm not someone who wants to give birth, is terrifying. I'd rather leave it to other people. But it is something that takes women to that knife edge of life and death, and where nothing is guaranteed for either the woman who's going to give birth, or the baby or babies that are birthed. And it's that kind of mess and complexity and not knowing and aliveness. And I think what her point is wouldn't you want to be present as fully as possible, regardless of whether it's a birth or it's a death? And often these things come hand in hand. So it's that sense of being really able to bear witness fully and be present fully and not turn away. And so I think, kind of coming towards the end of this part of the conversation, another question I have is, how can we engage with the grief and the fear and the shutting down without collapsing, without feeling so overwhelmed that it's unbearable? What are ways to kind of dance with it without becoming immobilized?
Well, if you dance with it, you don't become immobilized.
So it's in the dancing itself, in the moving towards.
Yes, it's in the dance because we don't know, and life is a grand mystery, and you know, I love Joanna Macy, and I brought her into the Guardian once to do a day-long session then, and we've had a couple of times on the Way Out is In podcast, and on the last one she said they're bodhisattvas across the universe queuing up to come back here and to help at this moment. This is the most important moment to be alive. And it's the most important moment because it's this moment. And it's this moment of great danger. And so we show up fully, but without preconceptions, without needs, without attachments, but we fully show up as human beings because that's what's missing. People just showing up fully as human beings, people just being present to what is, and present to what might be, and present to their hopes and dreams, but without holding on to them for dear life, but just releasing them into the world and seeing if they find a home. And if enough of us do that, then...
I think that's the hard part, the releasing.
Yeah, but it is and it isn't. It seems hard, and, you know, but that's as I said, you know, knowing that my brothers will all pass and I will pass has great sadness in it, and also tenderness and love and beauty. And, you know, in Japanese art, they have wabi-sabi, you know, the beauty in decay. You know, that in decay there is enormous beauty. But in our minds, we've just bought into a principle that the flowers are only beautiful when they're alive, in full bloom, not as they, you know, we've got in our kitchen some of the lilies from Plum Village, and they're dying, and they've just been in a vase, slowly letting go of their colour, slowly letting go of the tendrils, letting go of the petals, and slowly drying up, and it's a process of great beauty as well.
So to end this part then, I'd love to ask you, I'm very curious about how you'll answer this one, how you orient yourself towards life and beauty and wholeness on dark days.
I think first of all is to understand, to call them dark days, because often when something comes and overwhelms us, which is often what a dark day is like, what I've understood is literally the idea of when we're overwhelmed by something, we think that's all it is. We think that's everything. And so I imagine, you know, and I don't know if this is fair or not, but I imagine when some people take their life, it's because they feel there's no way through and they're overwhelmed and they just don't believe there's a way through. And at that moment, make a decision that it's too much. And one of the things I've learned through the sort of Plum Village practice is that what mindfulness does is it allows you to embrace the feeling. So first of all, you name the feeling. So what is you know, it's not just a dark day, but what is it about the day that's dark? Is it that I'm feeling lost? Is it that I'm feeling hopeless? Is it I'm feeling vulnerable? Is it I'm feeling sad? Is it I'm overwhelmed by grief? Is it that I've lost someone I care about? Is it that something I dreamt of hasn't happened? Whatever it is, and to name the feeling. And there's something that I understand in the mind, that when you name something, it gives it borders. It creates a form around which you can embrace. That when it's just overwhelmed, it pushes out it fills every nook and cranny of your mind. There's nothing can get it. But as soon as you name it, what you're doing is you're already, in a sense, putting your arms around it. And as soon as you can put your arms around it, you create space, and you can create some containment for it, so that you're able to start to observe it as opposed to just be it. And to recognize that, impermanence, that I'm feeling this right now, but I actually wasn't feeling it yesterday, and in a year's time I'm not sure if I'll even remember it. So to give it that context of things changing, and then also to feel it, because often our greatest fear is the feeling of something. Yeah. So the podcast I do with the abbot of the monastery is The Way Out is In, and that has a particular flavor to it, which is we go into things, and the way I've experienced it a few times in my life, it's like jumping into the abyss. And if we're being dragged into the abyss, then we feel we're victim, and the abyss becomes like this place of darkness and death, because that's the feeling, isn't it? That when we're overwhelmed, we feel there's a sort of almost it's like falling into the abyss, where there's no hope, there's no way through, and it feels dark, rather than actually recognizing I'm jumping into the abyss, I'm in the abyss right now, and realizing the abyss is, in art and philosophy, is, it's a place of infinite possibility. And in post-war art, the void was a real powerful expression of what it is, the void of post-war, post-Second World War. The feeling of loss and everything, but actually it was also the place of new possibilities. And I've been sort of escorted a couple of times into the abyss by mentors, and on both occasions they transformed my life. So I think that the dark days are not to avoid the feelings, not say, oh well, I can name it. I understand where it comes from. I felt it before, and therefore, that's cool. Because actually, it's to feel it. It's to go into the feeling, but not to be a victim of it. And also not to indulge in it sometimes, because sometimes we use these feelings to, some hidden payoff to feel something about ourselves that the bad feeling allows us to connect with. And this idea, it's not conscious that we choose. I want to choose a really bad experience to feel crap about myself, but that we have patterns of thinking and beliefs where we think sometimes there's a secret payoff to bad things happening to us. So I was just in a coaching session with someone earlier, and I mentioned one aspect which when I was younger I learned and seemed to make sense, and it's when children have a belief that their parents ruined their life, and blame their parents for something that happened in their life. The reason I'm not a social person is because actually I was always at home, and I was never allowed out, or whatever the belief is. And then the people can sabotage their life and to not be successful because it proves that their parents ruined their life, and that even when their parents are dead, that people will still want to prove their parents ruined their life by sabotaging their life, because that's more in it's more important to them to maintain the belief rather than to change the story. So I think one thing when there are dark days is just to really feel what's going on, but also to ask a question: is this serving me in some way? And then also to, again, Plum Village tradition in the store consciousness, you bring up your mindfulness to embrace the feeling and help it to calm it and settle it back down into store consciousness rather than it blowing up in mind consciousness. Is you calm it, you name it, you recognize it, you feel it, and then you calm it down and realize it will pass. Like everything will pass. Storms come and they pass. That's the theory, or rather the practice of it. And do I always do that? Absolutely not. Do I occasionally do it? Sometimes, occasionally I do parts of it. So, it's, but I understand it. And so therefore, because I understand it and I trust it, it allows me much easier to be through in that process. And sometimes without even thinking about it now. And sometimes I feel overwhelmed and think, the world's against me. It's like we're human.
I think that's when it's nice to have the companionship of others who can kind of be there with you and remind you that you're all right. It's interesting talking about kind of naming it, giving it form, containing it, and then it being about this place of possibility. I had I don't often talk much about my personal life on these shows, but I'm figuring this might be it's connected to the conversation.
Oh, good. Let's make this as an exception.
Let's make this an exception. And this is probably what you bring in your presence to the coaching, and people are just like, oh yes, here, I'll open up. But I recently had an experience, it was more than a few weeks back, where I came back into contact with a feeling that I'd had that was a very overwhelming feeling when I was a kid growing up for many years. And I'd forgotten about this feeling and the sense of it was almost like a sense of betrayal or injustice of being alive and not wanting to be here. And it wasn't a suicidal sense at all. It was just this fury of feeling alone and not feeling connected. And it was weird. I was like, why is it that I'm suddenly connecting to this old feeling that I had no recollection as an adult of having, even though it was quite potent and long lasting. And it connected to something another experience that I had that gave rise to a painting called Light in the Well of Shadows. And it was about sort of this idea that we can store hurts or wounds or traumas in the body, transgenerationally and the rest of it. And I'd done some work around the womb. And when I went in an imaginal way, I had all these really potent images that came. It was this dark place. There was a lot of fear and anger, but amidst the fear and anger, there was also this beauty and this potentiality. And I would love to show it to you. It's a painting. It's not quite finished yet. And I also don't show unfinished paintings, but here we go. It's a painting of my friend Blanche, who is a musician, and she's an extraordinary artist. And she posed for me. It's not quite finished, but I don't know if you can see that.
Yes, beautiful.
Thank you. It's about this potential for beauty and connection, even in the midst of suffering. And every time I look at that painting now, and it's the same with songs, when I write songs when I'm really heartbroken or excited or whatever, usually it's the kind of more painful feelings. As soon as that exists, if I'm feeling the feeling again, I go back to the song, and it doesn't remove the feeling, it sublimates it, or it creates something beautiful. It connects it to something that is more than just the feeling. And it's I don't know how to put it into words, but I don't know, it takes on a shape and a life that makes it somehow beautiful. And that's really precious, to have some kind of practice like that.
Thank you for exceptional sharing.
Exceptional sharing. Probably won't happen again for a while.
No, that's enough. That's enough, really. No more.
Yes. No more feeling.
Well, just to relate to that, because one of the times where I was escorted into the void, I I don't remember all the details. I remember the essential details, but not all the details. But I was going through this creative visualization with someone, and I got to the point where I could see myself that I was in this scene where someone was about to be burnt at the stake.
Wow!
So it was a sort of like Middle Ages type time, and there was someone tied to a pole, and there was the wood all around, and there was a mob. Oof. That had been obviously incited, that was with pitchforks, and I was in the mob.
Wow.
Sort of, shouting and this raw emotion of kill, got to kill this person. And then everything went very hazy, and the facilitator asked me to go sort of deep, to jump into this place. And he asked me to say, who do you want to go, who would you like to go with? Because you should never go into the void on your own, because you can get lost very easily. And I chose two archangels. I mean, it sounds very woo-woo, but at the time it didn't feel like that, and I have nothing to do with angels or archangels, but he asked me, and that's what came to my mind. Mm-hmm. And we and it was like went deep into this, and we just went down and down, and eventually landed in this darkness, and followed this path. And there was this, I could hear all this sort of shouting, and ahead there was this doorway, and it went into this huge underground cathedral. Wow. And there were thousands of people, and at the front was the devil. Wow. Basically, and he was training all these people to go forth into the four corners of the world, and to spread sort of hatred and anger and division. And I walked forward with the two archangels down the aisle of this, vast cave-like cathedral, and went to confront the devil. And when we went to confront him, he just, like a puff of smoke, he just disappeared. And in that moment, I was just transported back to the scene of the burning, and the person who was at the stake, there was just light shining out of them. Wow. And reverence to this being. And so I feel a lot of emotion welling up around it, because it's because I think that's what we're called to do. That's what we're called to do, is that, there is hatred, and there is division, and there is anger, but we can transform it into reverence. And it's possible to do that. And in a sense, that's what we need most, is that the very people we want to burn are normally the people who can save us. And we choose to burn them because it's too painful to believe that we can be saved, or we may not want to be saved. Or we may feel more comfortable in our anger and despair than in our joy and our happiness. So not so dissimilar to what you were saying in your painting about facing into the dark times, not running away from them, but challenging them, walking towards them with support, not our own, but with support, and transforming into tenderness and love. And it is possible. Sometimes. Occasionally.
Do you remember Bill Hicks? Did you used to watch Bill Hicks at all in the 80s? He's a comedian.
It rings a bell.
Yeah. This very quick-witted, quite abrasive, polarizing comedian, and he had this close to all of his shows where it was about life being like a dream, and the point that he would come back to, and not dissimilar to what you just said, it's like people come back to remind us, and we kill these people because we're so wedded to the dream. And it's the kind of a call to wake up from the most unexpected place, from someone who drinks and smokes, the kind of characters that you wouldn't necessarily imagined to be aligned with the bodhisattvas of this world. And yet, and yet the song is still sung. So before we move to the gentle questions round, just a very simple question, which is, where are the best places to find you, to listen to The Way Out Is In? What are the links that you can share with people, and, also about Plum Village?
Well, just that really. I mean, The Way Out Is In, it's on all the podcast platforms. It's very easy to find. It's in a sense the love of my life, because I get, the abbot of the monastery is, this beautiful young man. He's 35. He
Brother
was
Phap
the
Huu.
attendant of Thich Nhat. Yeah, he was the attendant of Thich Nhat for 17 years. He imbues that spirit, and we sit in Thich Nhat's little hut called the Sitting Still Hut. And we sit around his kitchen table, and we just, I suppose, shoot the breeze. I mean, we come up with a topic in that moment or the day before. We don't plan anything. We don't edit it, in the sense, I mean, it's edited for sound quality, but it goes out in one go. We don't interrupt it. It's just one take, and it's the way I love to live life. It's spontaneous. It's emergent. I get to know what I do know. I get to know what I don't know. I get to learn new perspectives, and we get that's the personal side, and I love it, and it brings me joy and refreshes my spirit, and also it seems to do rather well in the world, in the sense of we get so much feedback of people who find it helps them through their dark days, and who gives them a sense of direction, gives them new perspectives. So it does for other people what it also, when people occasionally get in touch and say things like, this has helped me see the world in different ways, and I always reply, yeah, it has for me too. because whatever people say about it, for them it tends to be what I think about it for me too. So I do, we wanted to create it as just a place where people feel at home. It's the signature Plum Village: I have arrived, I am home. And I think that's the most important thing, is when do we feel at home? And so if it helps people to help bring people home, then that is my journey, and I think in some ways all our journey.
Beautiful. Thank you. I'm going to leave that bit there, because that's such a nice place to end the main conversation. I often listen to you when I'm painting, by the way, which is a joy, because it's quite soothing for the soul. And sometimes I have to stop and rewind. I need to hear that bit again. So
well, can I just say one last thing, which is...
Please.
No, one of the best responses I had was we went to stay in a bed and breakfast in England, where we stay every year. And the year before last, my wife had mentioned that I do a podcast. And when we went back the following year, we walked into the entrance, and the woman came out and said, "Oh, I just have to say straight away, I absolutely love your podcast." And I sort of puffed up a little. I said, "Oh, really? How lovely." I said, "What do you like about it the most?" She said, "Well, you know what? I have real trouble sleeping. And when I..." And she said, "Every time I put it on, within a few minutes, I'm fast asleep, and I have the best night's sleep." And I thought, well, how wonderful that it supports you in your sleep. What better result is there than that?
That's amazing. Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. I have a podcast that's like that, but it only happens when I'm on a plane, which is not often, because I try to cut down my planing, or like on a bus, which is This Jungian Life, and it's just so soothing, and they feel like such welcome voices. I'm like, and then within 5 minutes, I'm like, oh no, completely missed that. But that is a gift. That's a real gift. The gift of sleep.
Podcast for insomniacs. Anyway, Sorry, let's move on.
No, that's fine. So, the first question in this section is, if you could go back to young Joe when he was maybe 10 or 11 years old, and be in conversation with him, what advice might you give him, and what advice do you think he would give you?
So I have actually, this was the first transformation I ever went through. Was there was in the US when I was young, there was a very famous psychologist therapist called John Bradshaw, who did a lot of work on the inner child. And I was working for the Sunday Telegraph, and I liked watching his program, and I thought, well, I'll go and write about him. So under the guise of, got in touch with my editor, said, look, can I go to New Orleans to do this, to write a piece, without saying, actually, I want to go for myself. And I went there, and he did this creative visualization of going back to meet oneself as a child.
Oh.
So I actually had this conversation, and it changed my life. It fundamentally shifted my understanding, because he asks you to imagine the age, and I imagined myself as 9, and he then asks you to go back to your house, and as an adult, and to go and walk into the house and find where your child is. And I was in my bedroom, and I was crying, and I was feeling lonely, and that I didn't think life was worth living, and that I had no hope in me. And I sat down on the bed and said, it's okay, we made it, I'm okay now. I'm sort of I'm working things through, and you're going to be okay. And and what I realized in that, actually afterwards, because I spent then the next week in New Orleans just writing around what my experience through those 3 days was, but what I realized is that in the present moment we can heal the past and change the future. And so in that present moment of connecting to myself as a young person, I reached into the past, and I was able to heal. I was able to visit myself as a child and actually change my young self-understanding of life. That then changed me back in the present moment through that connection. So I went in the present moment to the past. The perception changed. That child's perception then came to me, back to me in the present moment, and changed me in that next moment. And in that moment, I changed the trajectory of my future. Because rather than feeling still that part of me that felt alone and lost and without hope, that I was able to have that conversation. And for him to, and the advice from him, I can recognize that, things did work out. Things are okay. That you are still here. That you are making sense of the world now. And there's something that was I think the defining moment that changed my life, because we can heal the past in the present moment, and it then heals us in the present moment, and then it transforms our future. And I sometimes see it almost as the sign of the body in the present moment, and then with our left hand we reach out to the past, and with our right hand we reach out to the future, and that is that sort of the cross to me is the balance of in the future I can heal the past and transform the future. But I do it through my grounded body, my feet on the ground, my spirit connection to spirit above, and then from that place of that's the sort of the idea of the Kabbalist who's grounded on the Jewish mysticism. The Kabbalist, he's got his feet on the ground, but he's able to call God through the archangels, through the angels, into his being, and then in that way, on the left is the world of nature, and on the right is the world of man, the other way around. So it has that same, another way of seeing that sort of, we bring heaven to earth in a grounded way. We recognize the power of nature, and we recognize the role of humanity, and we're able to integrate all of that. So it's a sort of similar idea.
I love that idea. And also the sense that the past and the future are alive and available to us.
Absolutely.
That it doesn't have to be this stuck thing that's cast in stone, that there's a potential to actually call out, reach out to it.
And we can heal our relationships. We can heal anything where we feel we've done something wrong, or we feel someone has wronged us. We can heal that in the past and in the present, and release ourselves and release them. Because it's our holding on to people that blocks them from moving on in whatever way that manifests. Who knows? So
I'm just going to ask an extra follow-in question to this, because it would feel like a waste not to take this opportunity. Is there one, or maybe there's a couple of practices that if people are listening to this and they're thinking, actually, I'd really like to explore that you can point people towards, they know what to search for?
Maybe firstly to smile in the mirror. And that's a very simple practice.
That's true.
To sort of to look at oneself in the mirror and to see oneself more fully. But in terms of, I mean, there's Thich Nhat's books. I love my two favourite of his however many 150 books he's written.
Wow.
One is The Heart of the Buddha's Teachings. And it's just such a beautiful and simple telling of the heart of this philosophy, which I think can transform our lives. And then the second one is The Art of Living, which is edited by one of the beautiful sisters of Plum Village, Sister True Dedication. And it's again just a very simple and beautiful application of how Zen can help us to live a better life.